On the evening of August 21, 1955, 11 people in the rural community of Kelly, Kentucky, reported an encounter that would become one of the most documented and debated cases in the history of alleged alien contact. A quiet Sunday supper at a family farmhouse escalated into a 4-hour armed standoff with entities that witnesses described as small metallic beings with glowing eyes. 20 law enforcement officers responded to the scene that night, and what they discovered, along with what they failed to find, has sparked debate for 70 years. 8 miles north of Hopkinsville, Kentucky, the Sutton farmhouse stood on Old Madisonville Road in a landscape of open fields and scattered woods. The unpainted 3-room structure had no running water, no telephone, no radio, no television, no books. 50-year-old Glennie Langford owned the property, a widowed matriarch, whose reputation in the community centered on strict religious principles. Investigators would learn that Mrs. Langford forbade both alcohol and cursing on her property. Her 3 younger children lived with her, 12-year-old Lonnie, 10-year-old Charlton, and 7-year-old Mary. Company had arrived for that particular Sunday. Mrs. Langford's older sons from a previous marriage, Elmer Lucky Sutton and John Charlie Sutton, visited with their wives Vera and Aline. Aline's brother, known as O.P. Baker, rounded out the adult guests along with 21-year-old Billy Ray Taylor and his 18-year-old wife June. Taylor and Lucky Sutton worked together as carnival workers, and the Taylors had traveled from Pennsylvania for the weekend visit. Police Chief Russell Greenwell would tell investigators something important about this family. The Suttons were not people who typically sought help from law enforcement, he explained, but rather the type who reached for their guns first and called police only as a last resort. This assessment carried weight when evaluating what happened next. Local residents who knew the family consistently described them as quiet, trustworthy, and level-headed, with no history of what investigators termed preposterous allegations. A hearty supper prepared by Mrs. Langford gave way to card games as the summer heat lingered into evening. Around 7:00 p.m., Billy Ray Taylor stepped outside to draw water from the well in the backyard. What he claimed to witness next set extraordinary events in motion. Taylor reported seeing a bright silvery object streaking across the sky with what he described as an exhaust all the colors of the rainbow. According to his account, the craft appeared real bright as it flew over the house, stopped abruptly in midair, then descended straight down into a gully, approximately 400 yards from the farmhouse. He claimed to hear no explosion, only a hissing sound as the craft allegedly landed behind trees that blocked his view. His breathless report to those inside met with laughter and dismissal. The family assumed he'd seen a shooting star, or perhaps a meteor from the Perseid shower, which was active during that period, and they returned to their card game. None of them knew that other witnesses across Kentucky were reporting similar bright lights in the sky that same evening. Approximately 1 hour passed in relative calm. The family dog began barking frantically and aggressively at something outside, prompting Lucky Sutton and Billy Ray Taylor to grab firearms. Lucky took a 12-gauge shotgun, while Billy Ray armed himself with a .22 caliber pistol and investigate. What they encountered at the back door would, according to their subsequent accounts, terrify them beyond anything they had experienced. An eerie glow approached from the direction of the field, and in the midst of this luminescence, the 2 men claimed to observe a small humanoid figure, approximately 3.5 feet tall. Witnesses would provide remarkably consistent descriptions of these entities in the hours and days that followed. The creatures had oversized heads that appeared almost perfectly round, they reported, with arms that allegedly extended almost to the ground. Hands displayed what witnesses called talon-like claws. But the most striking feature remained the eyes, which witnesses claimed glowed with a yellowish light. In the minimal illumination provided by that night's new moon, the creatures' bodies allegedly gave off a shimmering quality. Multiple witnesses later compared the appearance to shimmering bright metal, or described it as looking like on my refrigerator. Mrs. Langford told investigator Isabel Davis that the beings resembled a 5-gallon gasoline can with a head on top and small legs. Lucky Sutton fired at the creature, which reportedly performed what looked like a backflip before retreating into the darkness. This first encounter allegedly occurred around 8:00 p.m., and what the family didn't realize was that this marked only the beginning of their ordeal. Witnesses reported that the creatures repeatedly approached the farmhouse over the next several hours, appearing at windows, peering through doorways, and climbing onto the roof while the family heard scratching sounds from above. Each time a creature appeared, one of the men fired at it, and witnesses claimed they could hear metallic sounds when bullets struck the beings, sounds described as resembling rocks rattling in a tin can. Billy Ray Taylor stepped outside under the small overhanging roof above the back door, and those inside the house reported seeing a claw-like hand reach down from above and touch Taylor's hair. Family members screamed and pulled him back into the house while Lucky Sutton fired at the overhang, and then at another creature he claimed to see in a nearby tree. The being floated to the ground and scurried into the woods, according to the account. Mrs. Langford later described one particularly close encounter in detail. She reported going into the hallway and crouching down next to Billy Ray when she saw one of the entities approaching the door, and they stared at each other, separated only by the window screen, for what seemed like an extended period. The creature's face stood just inches from hers, she claimed. Witnesses reported that the beings never attempted to enter the house throughout the siege, appearing only interested in peering inside. No hostile actions were reported beyond their persistent approaches, and the creatures appeared to retreat when fired upon only to return minutes later from a different angle. The family had fired approximately 4 boxes of ammunition by the end of the encounter. Adults took turns standing guard while the 3 younger children were kept hidden and away from the windows. The household had no telephone to call for help, and as the hours wore on with the creatures continuing to return, terror mounted. Finally, around 11 o'clock p.m., a lull in the activity presented an opportunity. All 11 occupants of the house ran for the vehicles parked on the property, piled in, and drove at high speed toward Hopkinsville. When they burst through the doors of the police station approximately 8 miles away, their condition left no room for doubt about their distress. One of the men reportedly shouted, "We need help, we've been fighting them for nearly 4 hours." The duty officer immediately recognized that something serious had occurred. The children were hysterical, the adults visibly shaken, sweating profusely, and struggling to speak coherently. An investigator who arrived shortly after measured Billy Ray Taylor's pulse at 140 beats per minute, nearly twice the normal resting rate, and police confirmed that none of the witnesses showed any signs of alcohol consumption or intoxication. Chief Russell Greenwell mobilized a massive response after the duty officer called him. Concerned about a possible gun battle between families or an attack of some kind, law enforcement descended on the small rural community in force. The response team eventually included 4 city police officers, 5 Kentucky state troopers, 3 deputy sheriffs, and 4 military police officers from the nearby U.S. Army Fort Campbell, while a photographer from the Kentucky New Era newspaper also accompanied them. In total, approximately 20 officers responded to the scene. The convoy of vehicles, now including the frightened family, raced back to the farmhouse on Old Madisonville Road, where officers conducted a thorough search of the property and surrounding fields using flashlights. They examined the house, the yard, the field where the craft had allegedly landed, and the woods beyond in a search that continued for hours. What investigators found and failed to find would become central to debates about the case. Officers discovered numerous shotgun shell casings scattered around the property and documented bullet holes in the window screens and door screens, along with minor structural damage to the house, consistent with gunfire from inside. One single .22 caliber bullet hole was noted in one screen, likely from Billy Ray's pistol. One officer reported seeing something glowing in the woods, but a search of the area yielded nothing of substance. Investigators noted that the ground beneath where Lucky claimed to have shot one of the beings appeared to have some kind of stain that gave off an iridescent sheen when viewed from certain angles, though no samples were collected for analysis. Despite the extensive search, officers found no creatures, living or dead, no spacecraft or landing traces, no footprints or tracks of any kind. They found no scratch marks on the roof despite witnesses reporting scratching sounds throughout the siege, no blood, no hair samples, no physical evidence whatsoever that any beings had been present. Chief Greenwell questioned the family members separately, and according to the police reports, the remarkable consistency of their accounts struck him immediately. Even though the men had been away from the farmhouse all day and couldn't have coordinated their stories, their descriptions matched precisely. The women and children told identical versions of events, and the chief noted that the witnesses appeared genuinely terrified. The police finally left around 2 o'clock in the morning after hours of fruitless searching. The family, exhausted and traumatized, attempted to settle in for what remained of the night while Mrs. Langford got her 3 youngest children to bed, and the adults tried to rest, though Lucky Sutton reportedly sat in a rocking chair with his shotgun across his lap. Around 3:30 a.m., the creatures returned according to the family. Mrs. Langford awoke from a fitful sleep and reported seeing one of the beings on the other side of her bedroom window with its claw-like hand resting on the screen. She alerted Elmer, who shot at it despite her protests, and more gunfire erupted in the next 2 hours as the creatures allegedly continued their approaches. Finally, around 5 o'clock a.m. as dawn broke, the beings reportedly vanished for good. Police returned to the farmhouse later that morning for a follow-up investigation and found the house empty. Neighbors informed the officers that the family had packed up and left shortly after sunrise, reporting that the Suttons claimed the creatures had returned in the early morning hours. The family had abandoned the property entirely. Local radio station employee Bud Ledwith arrived at the scene that same day after hearing about the incident during his morning drive to work. As an engineer and announcer for WAP Radio, he managed to locate the family and conducted interviews with the adult witnesses, speaking with Mrs. Langford and the Sutton women separately from the men, who who had been away from the house throughout the day. The specificity and consistency of their accounts impressed him despite their having no opportunity to coordinate their stories. Led with created detailed sketches based on the witnesses' descriptions, documenting their earliest recollections before memory could fade or become influenced by outside sources. These drawings would become some of the most important records of the encounter, showing creatures with the distinctive features the witnesses had described: oversized round heads, pointed ears, long arms, claw-like hands, and spindly legs. The story broke wide open by that afternoon. The Kentucky New Era published the first newspaper account on August 22, reporting that witnesses claimed to have seen 12 to 15 of the creatures, a number that became widely repeated despite witnesses stating they never saw more than 2 beings at the same time. The story quickly spread beyond local coverage, and within days, radio stations across the country were reporting on the incident, while the New York Times picked up the story and national media attention followed. Hundreds of curiosity seekers descended on the Sutton farmhouse in the days that followed. Some came seeking evidence, others to ridicule the family, and the Suttons were called ignorant, drunk, and fraudulent despite police confirmation that no alcohol had been involved. The family initially posted no trespassing signs, but these proved useless at deterring the crowds, so in desperation, they began charging admission: 50 cents to enter the grounds, $1 for information, and $10 for photographs. This decision backfired spectacularly, as skeptics seized on it as evidence that the entire incident had been a hoax designed to make money. The incident eventually attracted the attention of the United States Air Force's Project Blue Book, the official military program investigating unidentified flying objects. According to multiple sources, however, the Air Force never officially pursued an investigation beyond checking with military personnel at Fort Campbell, who had been briefly at the scene on the night of the incident. The case was listed in Project Blue Book files and classified as a hoax with no further comment, though some researchers have disputed this classification while the official Air Force position remained dismissive. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who served as Project Blue Book's civilian scientific consultant, called the case preposterous and offensive to common sense. The Air Force investigation program regarded encounters involving alleged beings or occupants as impossible, by definition at that time, and such reports were often filed under CP, which stood for crackpot. The most comprehensive civilian investigation came in 1956, when ufologist Isabel Davis spent 4 days in Hopkinsville in June of that year, from the 12th through the 15th. She conducted extensive interviews with Mrs. Langford, Aline Sutton, and other witnesses, along with Police Chief Russell Greenwell and other law enforcement officers who had responded to the scene. Her investigation resulted in a nearly 200-page report titled Close Encounter at Kelly and Others of 1955, co-written with Ted Blocher. Detailed maps, drawings, documentary records, and summaries of similar accounts from around the world filled the Davis report. Davis examined every possible conventional explanation for the incident, asking whether it could have been a deliberate hoax, a publicity stunt, whether the witnesses could have been hallucinating or suffering from group hysteria, whether they could have been intoxicated, despite police statements to the contrary. Davis ruled out each of these explanations after thorough investigation, finding them inconsistent with the evidence and witness behavior. Her strong impression after meeting Mrs. Langford was that of a somber, no-nonsense matriarch who abhorred the limelight and had no reason to lie, and Davis noted that none of the witnesses had any history of making preposterous allegations. Without physical evidence supporting the extraordinary claims, however, Davis acknowledged that the case remained officially unsolved. Researcher Jerome Clark would later write that police, Air Force officers from nearby Fort Campbell, and civilian ufologists found no evidence of a hoax. The lack of physical evidence remained the insurmountable problem. No bodies, no spacecraft fragments, no footprints, no hair samples, no blood. Nothing tangible remained to support the witnesses' claims beyond the bullet damage they had inflicted on their own property. The question that has dominated discussions of the Kelly-Hopkinsville case for 7 decades is straightforward. What did these people actually see? 2 primary theories have emerged, each with passionate advocates. The skeptical explanation, most thoroughly developed by Joe Nickell of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, proposes that the witnesses misidentified a pair of territorial great horned owls. Nickell published his analysis in 2006 in an article titled Siege of Little Green Men, the 1955 Kelly, Kentucky incident, in Skeptical Inquirer magazine. Several supporting elements strengthen the owl theory. Great horned owls are native to Kentucky and common in the region, strictly nocturnal and most active approximately 1 hour after sunset, which matches the timeline of the first creature sighting. These owls stand approximately 2 feet tall, falling within the range of reported creature heights, and they possess large yellow eyes that glow when reflecting light sources. Their prominent ear tufts could be interpreted as pointed ears, Their talons could easily be described as claw-like hands, and when their wings are raised, they could conceivably be mistaken for long arms. August represents breeding season for great horned owls, a period when they become extremely aggressive in defending their nests and attacking humans who venture too close. These owls fly almost silently, and can appear to vanish and reappear quickly in darkness, and most significantly, the witnesses admitted they never saw more than 2 creatures at any one time, which perfectly matches a mating pair of owls defending their territory. Nichol noted that moonlight reflecting off the mixed coloration of owl feathers could potentially create a silvery or metallic appearance under the right conditions. Shooting owls in the dark with no electric lighting, while under extreme stress, would be extremely difficult, potentially explaining why no bodies were found. The initial UFO sighting was likely a meteor from the Perseid shower, Nichol argued, which had been reported by other witnesses across Kentucky that evening. Psychological factors strengthen the owl theory. The 1950s represented the height of UFO media hysteria, with science fiction films like Earth vs. the Flying Saucers saturating popular culture. The initial flying saucer sighting by Billy Ray Taylor, whether a meteor or misidentified object, could have primed the witnesses to interpret subsequent ambiguous stimuli as extraterrestrial, and fear and excitement in a confined, isolated setting. French ufologist Renaud Leclet reached similar conclusions to Nichol about owl misidentification. Psychologists have pointed to the case as an example of mass hysteria, or shared psychotic disorder, where one person's fear spreads to others, causing them to misinterpret ordinary events as extraordinary. Believers in the authenticity of the encounter present compelling counter-arguments. The Sutton family and their guests were rural people intimately familiar with local wildlife, who would have recognized owls even under stressful conditions, they note. Owls do not typically approach human habitations repeatedly over a 4-hour period, and the metallic sound reportedly heard when bullets struck the beings. Ufologist Alan Hendry wrote that the case is distinguished by its duration and also by the number of witnesses involved. Thomas Bullard of the Center for UFO Studies noted that the Kelly humanoids were among the earliest occupant reports associated with UFOs in the U.S. that carried any credibility as factual events. Prior to Kelly-Hopkinsville, most American encounter reports described benevolent space brothers with messages about nuclear weapons, accounts that had no credibility, and the Kelly case represented a different type of report entirely. The consistency of witness accounts remained striking when examined closely. All witnesses provided matching descriptions when interviewed separately by both police and civilian investigators, despite being kept apart, and the creature's appearance, behavior, and the sequence of events all aligned across multiple testimonies. The genuine terror observed by experienced police officers suggested the witnesses believed what they were reporting. Long-term effects on the witnesses argue against a deliberate hoax. Mrs. Langford sold the farmhouse she had lived in for decades and moved to an apartment in town because, according to her granddaughter, she felt safer around other people. J.C. Sutton reportedly couldn't hold down a job after the incident due to psychological trauma, and Lucky Sutton's granddaughter, Geraldine Sutton Stith, has stated that her father never joked about it and was still terrified by it until his dying day. No witness ever recanted their story or confessed to a hoax despite decades of ridicule and skepticism. The family gained nothing from the incident except harassment and eventual displacement from their home, and the attempt to charge admission came days after the encounter in response to overwhelming crowds of unwanted visitors, primarily conducted by Billy Ray Taylor, rather than the entire family. If this was a hoax, what was the mechanism? How did the family create glowing creatures that could be shot at but left no bodies? How did they coordinate such an elaborate deception involving 3 young children? Why would a religious widow like Mrs. Langford, who forbade even cursing in her home, participate in such a scheme? The Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter left a cultural legacy far beyond the immediate incident, most notably popularizing the phrase "little green men" as a generic descriptor for aliens. The witnesses never described the beings as green, they consistently called them silver or metallic, but the Evansville Courier newspaper, employing what journalists call creative license, used the term "little green men" in their coverage. Other media outlets quickly adopted the phrase, and it spread worldwide, eventually being translated into multiple languages. The incident influenced popular culture in ways the witnesses could never have imagined. Director Steven Spielberg came across the Kelly-Hopkinsville case while researching his film Close Encounters of the Third Kind and became fascinated by it, beginning development of a dark science fiction horror film called Night Skies, specifically based on the incident. The project would have depicted 11 aliens terrorizing a Kentucky farmhouse, but that screenplay eventually evolved into the much gentler E.T., the Extraterrestrial. The 1986 comedy horror film Critters is loosely based on the Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter, and the Annoyance Theater in Chicago produced a musical called It Came from Kentucky, inspired by the events. In 2020, the History Channel series Project Blue Book devoted an episode to the case, and the creatures have been featured in numerous paranormal television programs and documentaries over the decades. Video games have been influenced by Kelly-Hopkinsville as well. The Pokémon character Sableye, introduced in Generation 3, was directly inspired by the descriptions of the Hopkinsville Goblins, and the character's design incorporates the large ears, glowing eyes, and distinctive appearance from witness accounts, while the Pokémon's swaying animation is based on the creature's reported gait. In the Pathfinder role-playing game, a type of gremlin called Hopkins in the Bestiary 5 book is based on the goblins described in the encounter. The town of Kelly began celebrating the incident annually in 2010 with the Little Green Men Days Festival, typically held the third weekend of August. The event draws visitors from around the world, who come to hear witness family members speak, tour the site where the farmhouse once stood, and participate in costume contests and other activities. The festival was suspended during the COVID-19 pandemic, but has since been revived as Alien Invasion Day, and the Penny Riley Museum in Hopkinsville maintains exhibits about the encounter. Only the water well remains on the property where the original farmhouse once stood before being demolished decades ago. During festival events, tour organizers point out the spot where the house stood, and the location in the field where witnesses claim the craft landed. And according to some reports, nothing grows on the alleged landing site, though this claim has not been scientifically verified. Geraldine Sutton Stith, daughter of Lucky Sutton, has become the family's spokesperson in recent years. She has written 2 books about the incident and appears regularly at festivals and events, acknowledging that skeptics will always have doubts while maintaining that her family experienced something traumatic that changed their lives forever. "My family went through something," she has stated, "whether it be paranormal or extraterrestrial, that changed their lives." Psychologists continue to use the Kelly-Hopkinsville case as an academic example when teaching critical thinking skills. Researchers Rodney Schmaltz and Scott Lilienfeld cite the incident as an example of how to distinguish extraordinary claims from evidence, though they suggest intoxication may have played a role despite police statements to the contrary. After 70 years, the case remains genuinely unresolved. The skeptical explanation, misidentified owls combined with a meteor sighting and psychological factors, accounts for many details and represents a rational, testable theory grounded in known animal behavior and human psychology. This theory requires accepting that rural Kentuckians couldn't recognize owls even after hours of observation, and that all 11 witnesses, including 3 children, sustained the same misidentification throughout the night. The alternative, that the witnesses encountered something genuinely unknown, is extraordinary and requires extraordinary evidence. That evidence doesn't exist in any form that satisfies scientific standards. No physical traces, no photographs, no corroboration from neighbors during a 4-hour siege that allegedly involved substantial gunfire. Just testimony, sketches and bullet holes in screens. What remains is testimony and its consequences. 11 people reported an encounter. 20 police officers responded. Investigators documented the case, and the witnesses never recanted while their lives were permanently affected. The incident influenced global popular culture and changed how we talk about aliens, but we have no proof of what actually occurred on that August night in 1955. The Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter endures because it represents something important in the study of claimed paranormal experiences. Multiple witnesses across different ages and backgrounds reported the same events. Immediate investigation by law enforcement took place. Genuine terror and lasting consequences were documented, yet no definitive physical evidence emerged. It's either one of the most compelling alien encounters ever documented, or it's a case study in how perception. The farmhouse is gone, the witnesses have mostly passed away, and the creatures, if they existed, left no trace. What remains is a story that refuses to die, an unsolved case that continues to divide believers and skeptics 7 decades later. On a quiet farm in Kentucky, something happened that 11 people would never forget, and what that something was